This session is brought to you by Nextier. Innovate, integrate, accelerate.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Presley, and I'm the executive editor of Hart Energy's E&P magazine. Thank you for joining us here today. You know, better communication is often cited as a solution to most problems. However, for producers, it is the communication between wells that is the problem. Producers in the Midcontinent have solved where well communication is the problem and have maximized it where it's a plus. In today's Well Interference No More session, two experts with IHS Markit will present on how producers are honing in on their well spacing. Raoul LeBlanc, our first speaker, is a vice president on the IHS Markit financials team evaluating the North American onshore arena. A former partner at PFC Energy, he has 20 years of experience in strategic and industry analysis. He holds an undergraduate degree from Georgetown University and an MA in Energy and International Relations from the School of Advanced International Studies, the Johns Hopkins University. Co-presenting with Raoul is Alireza Hakiat, Senior Technical Advisor and Trainer for Engineering Solutions at IHS Markit. Prior to joining IHS, he was a senior reservoir engineer at Eclipse Montage Resources for almost 5 years. He received a PhD in petroleum and natural gas engineering from West Virginia University and holds a master's degree in petroleum engineering from Delft University of Technology. So with that, over to you, Raoul.
All right. Thank you very much, Jennifer. I appreciate it. Look, before we start, I just want to make a couple of comments here. Why is this important? Right? I mean, well, okay, if you're an engineer in an oil and gas company, well spacing is important, right? Because you want to make sure you get the optimal amount of reserves and you maximize your NPV. But it's more important than that right now. Why? Because in the state of the current unconventional revolution, right, when you think about the trajectory of what we've been doing in the industry for the last 10 years, the fact is that we've already discovered the resource. We've already pretty much optimized where is good and where is bad, right? We know the good stuff and the bad stuff. We have figured out which benches work in which locations. What I'm getting to is that the dimension that's left to add a lot of value and the big unknown that remains, and it's getting more known every day, but is how far apart can I space these wells? Once I know that, I will have this resource pretty well understood. And the game really shifts from one of de-risking, right, and one of discovery to one of efficiency. And that you can see that transitioning happening in a lot of places. But that means that well spacing is this frontier that is the last chance to add a lot of value. And so we're going to talk about this. And frankly, I'm going to ask questions because I don't understand all this technical stuff very well. So what I'd like to do is pose a question here to my colleague, Alireza. So Alireza, we're here. We picked an example in the Marcellus because I think it's a pretty interesting play. And I've got this area right over here in Susquehanna County, and it's kind of an area that's really attractive. It contains probably some of the best gas wells in the country. But you know what? It's also got some crummy acreage too, right? And so I need to take account of a whole bunch of things in here, right? I got to understand the geology as it shifts from really good in the south, but not too far south, right, to not being very good. And then, of course, I've got all of these wild parameters about, you know, well design, right? How long do I drill it, and how intensely do I complete it, and all these other things. So when I'm looking to kind of understand well spacing, how do I take into account both those subsurface factors as well as the engineering well factors?
Okay. Thank you, Raoul. And to answer the questions that you asked, what we need to look at, we need to look at the geology and the completion in more detail. So in the Susquehanna County that you mentioned, we have an undeveloped acreage that we can see in this area. And what we want to do, we want to propose an optimized development plan for this acreage. And what we need to do, we need to honor both geology and the completion to be able to perform our development plan in an optimized way. So what we need to do, we need to first collect the geology data, the completion data, and see, you know, here we know what is the range of those parameters in the area that we are going to develop. We are looking at some geological parameters like permeability and porosity, which they are the main drivers for flow in the porous media. And besides that, we are looking at completion design, the lateral length, and more importantly, the sand loading blended. We are going to honor all of these data in order to evaluate the wells, and based on our evaluation, we are going to propose an optimized development plan. So these data are very important to understand the asset in an appropriate way, and then use them in conjunction with our analysis to come up with our development plan optimization.
Okay, so you're going to take everything that we kind of know, right? Yeah, about what the subsurface looks like in this particular area, and of course that's an unknown, right? So we've got a distribution here, and we've got the lateral length and what happens. So I got you. You're taking your geologic and engineering parameters, and I'm sure there's a whole bunch more. But then what do you do?
So when I have my engineering data and the completion data, this is a story. We have the geological rock, and what we do with the completion, we change this rock and we make that rock productive. What we really want to understand, we want to understand what happens in the reservoir when we perform our completion job in a specific geological location or formation. So that's the main uncertainty that we have. How effective is our drilling and completion? How much drainage area we are contacting? What is the stimulated rock productivity? These are the questions that we need to answer to be able to go with the best strategy. So in order to do that, imagine we have a rock, we perform a completion job, and the reservoir will respond to that completion job with the pressure and production data. So what we need to do, we need to analyze that pressure and production data in conjunction with some geological properties that I showed you, and we need to characterize our well and rock together. For example, some very important parameters, hydraulic fracture geometry. We want to know how extensive our fractures grow, because we need to understand the well interference. If based on that fracture geometry, we place the wells so close to each other, we will face interference problem. Or we want to know how much we make the rock productive. So that's the permeability. By performing rate transient analysis, we can come up with some sort of understanding of how the rock performs, how much is our fracture intensity, and then based on all of these interpretation results, what we can do, we can make a model that relates all of these properties to the production. And it tells us what will happen, for example, if we change some of these properties to the production. So what we have a predictive numerical model which honors physics and well geometry. And what it tells us how much we are going to produce from that well that we are going to drill in this area.
Okay, so you make a predictive model using all of the information that we know from the other well data, right, and understand how the rock reacts to various combinations, right? Because obviously spacing will be different, and this is one of the keys, that spacing will be different depending on your frac intensity, right? Because if you're going to frac it very intensively, you can place them further apart, and if you're going to frac them less intensely, you need to bunch them closer together, right?
Right, exactly. You're right. Nowadays, well spacing and completion design are integrated. We cannot optimize one of them in a standalone way. They should be optimized together. The space of our optimization now includes both completion and spacing. And with the model that you are showing in this slide, what we can do, we can capture the effect of both spacing and completion on well production. For example, completion is proper loading. When we increase the proper loading, the half length start growing and growing. And we can model that. We can see how much is the impact of fracture length on the production. We can add more fractures. We can have more clusters and then improve the productivity. We can place the wells closer to each other or further from each other and see what is the impact on the productivity. With this numerical model that we have, we can build a lot of what-if analysis, capturing all the optimization parameters that in our case is well spacing, proppant loading, how much proppant we want to inject into the well, and how many clusters we want to have in each individual well. So the space of optimization includes 3 parameters. And with this model, we can see what is the impact of each parameter on the well performance, production, and then we will convert this production to money and see, what can be the optimized solution.
Right. Okay. And so, all right. So I got this model, and then I'm going to test it out at various things, right? So what do we got going on here?
So the objective here to come up with the optimized development plan. What we want to do, look at the left part, we have an acreage, 4,000 feet by 6,000 feet acreage. And we want to come up with the optimized development plan for this acreage. So we are dealing with 3 optimization parameters. First is well spacing. How much the wells should be spaced regarding to each other. So we can have 4 different well spacing scenarios. We can either drill 3 wells that are spaced at 1,200 feet. We can drill 4 wells that are spaced at 900 feet. We can drill 5 wells and 6 wells that are spaced at 700 and 600 feet respectively. So
right.
We're dealing with 4 different well spacing scenarios. And then besides that, we can also change the number of clusters per well. So what you are seeing here, we have 25 clusters for each well. What we can do we can do a sensitivity analysis for number of clusters per well. So these are 2 parameters that I'm showing you here. And in the next slide, we can see, what is the role of third parameter in our development optimization plan. So what we can do, we can pump more proppant and grow the size of fractures. And there is a relationship between how much proppant you pump and how much hydraulic fracture growth you see. So you can see 3 different scenarios that I'm showing you. If you pump 1,500 pounds per foot of proppant, your fracture half length is 350 feet. In the bottom chart, what you can see, if we pump 4,000 pounds per foot of proppant, the fracture half length is 600 feet. So easily we can capture the impact of proppant per foot on the well performance by this model. And what we want to do, we want to have multiple runs. We can run this model several times based on different combination of all of these scenarios. There is different well spacing, proper loading, and number of fractures. And here you can see the results from.
Right. So these are the different scenarios, and this is the lateral length and proppant intensity and number of stages. Is that right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
So you can run everything and identify, these are the different EURs per well. So, all right, so you're taking into account these 3 parameters. By the way, it was interesting, on the last slide, you notice that in this case, you actually want some interference, right? At least some marginal overlap to make sure that you're producing the entire resource, right? So I'm going to make them overlap a little bit, interfere, but not too much. And then that will maximize the EUR per well. You can do a force ranking, simple force ranking like this, and you can identify, hey, if you want the most reserves, here's what you get. But it seems to me that there's the only thing missing is, I would think typically in these scenarios, what you're going to find out is, you know what, you should whack this thing really hard, right? Because this doesn't take into account yet the economic best scenario, right? So this is an EUR per well scenario. What's this? This is, I see. This is your sort of heat map, if you will. It says, hey, if you want to do this, load up your proppant, right? And drill your well spacing at 1,200 feet apart, right? And this is your best, right? But again, that doesn't take into account how much it costs to go from, say, 3,000 to 4,000 pounds of proppant, right? So what's the next stage that you do?
So what we need to do to understand what can be the optimized development scenario, we need to run the economics. We need to incorporate the cost of each completion design. Yes, as you mentioned, if you pump 4,000 pounds per foot of proppant into the well, you can maximize the recovery. You can take the most amount of volume out of the ground, but does it worth to do that? So in order to understand that question, we need to run different economic scenarios, and this changed the result a little bit. So you mentioned that you space the wells as long as you can and then pump as much as possible of proppant. But this time, when we incorporate the economics, this is not an optimized solution. So there should be optimized amount of proppant that you can pump, that if you exceed above that proppant volume, you are not going to make more money. So the incremental gain of the profit doesn't justify the incremental proppant that you pump more. So here what you can see, the scenarios change based on the economics. But you can see, for example, in the heat map, yes, the well spacing should be 1200, the well should be spaced, and we need to pump something around 2500 to 3000 pounds per foot. If you go above that, we will increase the volume production, but we are not going to gain more money. So that's the main message here.
Yep, and you can see that I guess in these slides, the breakover, right? So yeah, your breakover's there, right? And your optimum solution is it becomes interesting because of course it translates the optimum from a simple here's the optimum well spacing. Well, there is no optimum well spacing except in the context of how intensively you're fracking it, and of course other parameters too, where in the zone you're landing and that kind of thing, right? As well as cost, and you need to, I guess, embed all those in there, right? And so to come up with optimum solutions, which are really sort of efficient frontiers, right? If you will, or at least trade-offs that you have between the various options, and those kind of change around as, say, cost change, right? Or as you learn better ways to frack, right? So thanks, Alireza. I guess, what we wanted to show here today was that in our view, well interference is a multi-constraint solution, which does not yield a simple single answer. What you tend to need is, of course, you need the local geology, and that can vary from 5 miles over, right? So you've got to get the geology and the rock properties right. Understand your well design, where in the zone you're landing, right? And then also the completion design, which varies inversely with well spacing, of course. More intense, as you noted, creates a bigger drainage radius, right? And then I've got another one that we didn't have time to talk about today was how does this change if there's another well in the area, a parent well, and it would need to be taken into account in terms of the potential pressure sink that it may have created. So we've got that timing, which is another dimension, and then we showed you the incremental cost, obviously, which rise in a nonlinear manner. So our view is, hey, if you want to know optimal spacing, first of all, you have to have a customized solution for a particular location. You want to achieve that at scale if you can, okay? In other words, you need to run a lot of calculations very quickly, right? You find the subsurface optimization, and then you take into account the fact that it's in a pad, and then you take into account the fact that it may have other wells in time that have been drilled and certain costs that are applicable at a given time. So we're doing all of that. And the interesting thing to me now is, I think, if you had done this 10 years ago, it would have taken you a long time, even despite the significant computing power we had then. Imagine doing it 30 years ago, right? But there are new algorithms and callable algorithms, I think, in your software that you're using, certainly, Alireza, but that allows you to do these things now in minutes. And that's important because it allows you to have the scale and the customization together in a way that you couldn't really do before, when you were kind of creating cookie cutter recipes that you would apply to all wells, right? But we now have the time and the horsepower, even at the reduced staff that's generally working at E&P companies these days, right? We all know you have fewer people tasked to do more, but they have resources. And we think that, whether it's our software, Harmony, or other people's software, you can make these calculations, understand optimization, plot out the trade-offs, and make smarter choices. So that's the kind of prepared remarks we had for today.
Great. Thank you. So a couple of quick questions. All models are built on data, and how do you clean or QC the data, before you input it into your system? How do you verify its accuracy before you put it in?
Right. Alireza, I have some things to say, but you're the one that actually does a lot of that data cleaning and modeling. So how would you answer this question?
Sure, that's a great question. Thank you. So at the beginning of any process, we need to quality check the data because their quality will impact our final interpretation. So when we have the data, we have some different data pre-processing or quality check of data procedures. We go through that procedure to see if the data is following the pattern that we expect from a reservoir, a specific reservoir. We can quality check that with some different techniques, some things like type curve or some things like anomaly detection. We go through that data pre-processing, we check the quality. If something is out of our expectation, we disregard that data in our interpretation procedure. So that's, there is a workflow for data quality check. We import the data, we go through that workflow, and then we start our analysis.
Yeah, the only other thing to add to that is Jennifer, the best way to avoid bad data is to make sure that you have good data going in, high quality data coming in from whoever you're purchasing it from, right? This is not a plug for IHS Markit, but we do have very high quality data that's had a lot of vetting. So you have to make sure, and we all know, we've all been on tasks where people drown, conditioning the data and checking the data, right, for days or weeks in order to put it into the machine. Because you're right, if you put in garbage in, you know that you will get garbage out. So very important process. And part of the thing is to make sure you're accessing quality data. And the second thing is having automated anomaly detection and ability to deal with it.
Okay, great. So one more question. You mentioned variables. They're just the different variables and they're present in constructing a well and completing a well. One of those variables that there's been some debate over the past few years is just proppant types. It's the great in-basin versus northern white sand question. I'm just curious in this program and in your results and what you've seen and in running your models, are you seeing, or how do you account for the differences in proppant type? Do you separate out your northern white from your in-basin or your other local sand sources? How do you manage that?
Well, it's very difficult sometimes to know. So if you're down at a micro level and you can do research on each individual well, sometimes you can tell from the public data, right? Sometimes you may know from the operator or something that they've said, right? Or some other bits of information that you have. You may be able to figure it out. And in that case, what you want to do is you'd actually like to create a model, right? Which would take that into account as a variable. So that's the best answer is understand this so you can actually use that as a parameter, just like you would the lateral length or the proppant intensity, right? And then you say, hey, when you do this, and you can do the same thing, I think, with certain fracking technologies, right? That you might have, or is it slick water, or is it gel, right? Cross-link gel. So there's a whole bunch of things. The key there is can you know this? That's a tough thing to know sometimes, right? But if you can, certainly our model and our software can handle those kinds of variables and automatically on the fly just understand that, hey, here's the result for this. And it'll force you to put in, hey, what are you going to use, right? We're going to use that. Unfortunately, by the way, in this particular instance, in terms of in-basin sand versus, say, northern white sand, the real problem is nobody knows. Because to the degree that the problems may come with longevity or may only show up in years 6, 7, 8, right? But ruin the rest of the years that the well will be in existence. We don't have enough experience with in-basin sand because we've really only been using it for a couple of years, right? So, and it's a good reminder that there's always risk in this business, right? There's always the unknown, and a lot of this happens to the subsurface. What is the subsurface really like? Well, unless you have a log for that specific well, you probably don't know exactly, right? And so we're all dealing with a lot of risks and variability and trying our best to reduce that risk and come out with the best answer.
Okay, great. So with that, I'll bring this session to a close. So thank you, Raoul and Alireza, for joining us here today, and thank all of you out there for joining us. And stay safe. Goodbye.